sir.
Good morning.
Hope things are going well for you today, surviving the heat.
Oh, yes, things are going fairly well here.
Good.
We're doing quite well with the heat. You have to keep artifacts nice and cool to keep them from deteriorating, so we are quite comfortable.
That's why it's a good place for people that work with artifacts to be, is with the artifacts. So get that done. We put you, you called while we were finishing up with Aaron, so I didn't get a chance to ask you what our topic for today is, so I'll ask you now while we're rolling here. What is our topic for today?
Well, I found it interesting this day in history that I'd like to mention, and then get started on some agriculture, which will probably take more than one radio program.
Right. So what happened on this date in history? Where are we going back to?
We are going to July 19th, 1922, for the New Mexico State Penitentiary riot.
Okay.
Not the one in the 80s, not the one in the 50s, but the one in 1922. Seems that there were quite a few riots. Although, to be fair, this is an interesting one. It's not really, it wasn't really the prisoners rioting, it was the prison guards rioting.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, it's an interesting situation. The state penitentiary in the 20s, it was, they did a lot of manufacturing, the prisoners. They made a lot of bricks and other materials. They didn't like the food that they received, which makes sense when you realize what they're eating, and trying to stay active while eating. Basically, they ate a lot of beans.
Okay.
Very little else.
These are the prisoners, or the workers, or both?
The prisoners were the workers.
Okay.
They were put to work.
I meant the guards, the staff.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, the prisoners, their breakfasts, they didn't get any eggs with breakfast. For lunch, they had pork and beans. For dinner, beef stew with beans. And it just got so tedious and so unhealthy that finally on July 19th, while they were out in the yard, they said they would not go inside until the warden heard their complaints about the quality and quantity of food. And so the warden heard that, called one of the guard towers, told them to fire warning shots, frighten the men back into their cells.
Okay.
So the guards shot 6 prisoners, killing one of them.
But that's not what the warden said, right?
Well, that's what the warden claims he said.
Okay. So the warden claims he said fire into the air, basically scare them into their cells, but the guards must have heard differently. That's
at least what the investigations found. The states held multiple investigations, because the first one, they investigated and they determined that the warden was not feeding the prisoners well. And remember how I said they didn't get any eggs with breakfast?
Mm-hmm.
The penitentiary had purchased hundreds of thousands of eggs that year, but the prisoners didn't get to eat any eggs, so that was a question that was left unanswered by the warden as to where the eggs went.
Right.
And the warden was not happy with the results of the investigation, so he demanded a second investigation. So during the second investigation, they found that indeed the warden was not feeding them properly. He was not warranted in firing upon the prisoners. Overall, the warden and all the guards needed additional training.
Mm-hmm.
And the prisoners who were shot received commutations of their sentences, and one who was shot in the head was pardoned completely.
Wow. So the first investigation, the warden didn't like the results of the deal because it was questioning him and the eggs. And then the second investigation. So were there two different entities that conducted these investigations, or was it the same people?
I believe it was different people, all appointed by the governor.
Okay. Well, I'm hopeful that the warden maybe lost his job after this, or maybe not.
I do not believe so, no.
Huh. Training. Let's do some training. Wow. So this was 1922. One of the earliest reports of a riot at the state penitentiary. I wonder what the conditions were like. Obviously, the food was not very good. But in 1922, what could conditions have been like in a prison in New Mexico?
They weren't the best. I mean, they received food, clothing, shelter, but the guards had a habit of micromanaging the prisoners. The least infraction would result in confinements and solitary confinements, loss of privileges, things like that.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, during the investigation, the governor, it was announced in the papers, the governor ordered the warden to take people out of solitary confinement. So it wasn't the best situation.
Sure.
And so you could probably understand why the prisoners would say this is bad. We need the warden to hear our complaints.
Right. No question about that. Very interesting. Did you get a sense in reading the articles that were in the papers at the time, was there a perspective or an angle regarding the prisoners that you could tell from the way the articles were written?
Well, the initial reporting was actually saying that it was an attempted jailbreak.
Mm-hmm.
The first articles on it said that, which of course it wasn't, but a couple days later, that's when you started to see articles saying this was actually something going on at the state penitentiary. We need to investigate it. Hints of corruption, and some people thought that with it being with the elections coming up, there would be an impact on how the state level elections went,
mm-hmm.
depending on how the outcome of the investigation. So it was political fodder.
Sure. And was the governor seen as competent when it came to the prison, or incompetent? How did it manifest itself in the election, or how was it presented in the election to try to convince voters to vote one way or the other?
That I cannot say, because I'm not too well read on the 1922 local elections.
Gotcha.
But it was overall it was an interesting year for the United States, because it was all these articles on the prison activities were being shadowed by articles on the railroad strikes.
Okay.
And articles on the efforts at getting a bonus for the veterans of World War I.
Right, because they would have been, most of them, I guess, or all of them would have been back by then. And what did the country promise, and what did the country actually deliver to the veterans at the time?
Well, they promised congratulations and warm welcomes, and then some politicians promised them payments to help them integrate back into civilian life.
Mm-hmm.
But ultimately, they got tear gas, and General MacArthur's soldiers chasing them out of public parks.
Right. So
the bonus army.
So anything else from this time in 1922 that kind of pops off the pages there that you're going through?
Well, something that pops off the pages that I originally wanted to talk about before I saw that interesting article about prison break was agriculture.
Okay.
So I'll definitely have to talk about this more next week, but it's interesting how the Pecos Valley went from being kind of dry, desert-like, into being one of the agricultural hearts of New Mexico, that in the Rio Grande Valley.
Mm-hmm.
And that took a very long time to develop, and it'll take a very long time to talk about on the radio, so I have a feeling that next week I'll really get into it, but it all started in the 1860s.
Okay.
In the 1860s, that's when, of course, the Civil War was going on.
Right.
And the Homestead Act was passed in 1862, which that's an interesting law, because when you read it today, it's very uplifting, optimistic. People who want to put in effort and enjoy the fruits of their own labor can go west, get 160 acres, work on it, develop it, and have their own farm. But that actually started because Congress was very pessimistic about the Civil War.
Okay, because there was, I know part of the debate at the time was new states, would they be slave states or non-slave states? So was this the northern states' effort to get free states established by encouraging people to move west?
Exactly, and the Republican Party in the 1850s, so it was a brand new party, built entirely on northern and midwestern farmers. They were pushing for homestead acts throughout the 50s, and finally in 1862, they managed to get it passed because that was a sort of a low time during the Civil War when the United States kept on losing battle after battle, and they were worried that the Civil War would end either with southern states being independent or with southern states being brought back into the Union, but with slavery still intact.
Mm-hmm.
So without the slave states' politicians in Congress, they were able to finally get that passed with the hopes that no matter how the war ended, people would be able to move out west and develop small farms without slavery.
Right, right. Now, was this land tied in any way to where the railroads were going? I mean, did the railroads need people to farm so they would develop customers along the rail routes?
No. This was, and in fact, the entire idea predates railroads themselves.
Okay.
The idea was to develop the West through small property owners. Basically, the idea was to build America by having a lot of people live on family farms for generation after generation, farming the same 160 acres or 80 acres or 100 acres, depending on the state,
Mm-hmm.
just year after year, decade after decade. And because they are tied to the land and they own the land and they are citizens who voted, they would build communities. They'd build towns. They'd build schools. They would build. They'd build up the area and permanently feel connected to it.
Right.
And so that was the vision for all of the West. At least that was the northern vision. The southern vision, they had a different type of agriculture. Slave plantations, they tended to burn through the land very quickly. So they constantly needed to build more and more farms, abandon the old farms, abandon the old acreage, and the Northerners wanted to prevent that from happening in the West.
Right, right. If you owned the land and worked the land, and that was your land, you would treat it differently than if you just knew you could move to another place to build a plantation, if you will. So New Mexico was not a state in 1860, right?
It was not. It was a territory, and in fact, Arizona and New Mexico had not been split by that point yet either.
So it was one big territory. And so this act that was passed led to people coming out here to do that. Michael, we're about 40 seconds left, so we'll obviously have to pick up on this next week.
Oh, definitely.
But if you would remind everybody about your current exhibit and encourage folks to come by to see you.
Our current exhibit is the Fashionable Founding Fathers, menswear of 1905. in the Art Center, which you can view from 10 to 1, 2 to 4, Tuesday through Saturday.
Excellent. And you have air conditioning, so it's nice and pleasant in the museum. So.
Oh yes. If you're outside and it's really hot out, just come over to the museum and just hang out in the cold air. It's a good place